Good morning and welcome. Today is Tuesday, the third day of the month of Elul. And again, a reminder, don't forget to say the additional chapters in Tehillim, the Psalms. You can find a link to the daily Psalms, the daily Tehillim we say down in the description. And today we're finishing letter 10 in Igeret Hakodesh from the Alter Rebbe, from the Tanya. And this letter talks about the mitzvah of tzedakah, particularly why it is necessary, especially today, when it comes to the mitzvah of tzedakah, to do it beyond limitations. Don't limit yourself. Go beyond limitation. Now, we discussed this in the last couple of days. We're not talking about numbers, but we're talking about going beyond your own limitation when it comes to giving tzedakah. Because when you do that, you trigger in God the going beyond his limitations, so to speak, the limitations that God placed in this world. When we go beyond our limitations, God goes beyond his limitations. And this is something that is really, really necessary, especially now, as we are approaching the time of Mashiach. We are in exile. And we need to correct it. We need to fix the past. The only way to do that is to draw down from Hashem a light, an energy that goes way beyond anything that is in the system of this world. Because, as we discussed the last few days, one is not able to change the past unless you go beyond, unless you reach into Hashem to such a point that past, present, and future are the same, that is beyond any limitations. Then you can fix those things even from the past, and that brings the redemption, that the whole entire world will be redeemed. Now, the Alter Rebbe now, at the end of this letter, goes back to the verse that he began this letter with. And that is a verse that is written in the book of Lamentations by the prophet Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah. And it talks about Chasdei Hashem Kilot Tamno, the kindness of Hashem. The simple understanding of this verse means the kindness of Hashem have not ended. But the Alter Rebbe says that this is not the meaning of that verse. He gives a deeper another meaning of this verse. And he says, because the word in Hebrew, tamnu, which means ended, you say the kindness of Hashem have not ended. Tamnu means we have not ended, or we have not completed, as we'll soon explain. So the Alter Rebbe says that this verse is talking about us. He's talking about the kindness of God is something that we need to adopt. We need to adopt God's kindness. And why do we need to adopt God's kindness? That is because we are not complete. Kilot tamnu, we are not complete. And therefore, because in other words, if everyone would be fine, if the world would be a world of perfect tzaddikim, everyone would be perfect, then the way God set up the system of the world would work. You do the right thing, there's the godly energy that comes, everyone has his place, and everything is nice. The fact is, though, that we are not perfect. How do we know we are not perfect? Because we are in exile. Otherwise, we wouldn't be in exile. We would have the Beis Hamikdash, everything would be good. So the fact that we are not perfect, the fact that we did commit sins, when we need to correct and we need to bring it back and to make it even better than the way it was, this is why we need to act in a way of God's kindness, giving beyond limitations. And that's what we discussed in the last couple of days. Alter Rebbe also goes to say today also an interesting fact. It says in the Talmud, Ein ben David ba, Mashiach is not coming, until we will have empty pockets. And the Alter Rebbe quotes the first part of this verse and suggesting that this is why it is happening. Why? Because when we give tzedakah, when we're not obligated to do, meaning when a person doesn't have, he gave whatever is required, gave way beyond because there's nothing else to give. He's not obligated to give, and he still gives. That brings out the unlimited blessings. Will it really have to come in such a way? Will we really become poor? The Rebbe says, we'll soon explain, but the Rebbe explains that it doesn't necessarily have to be in that literal sense, although some will argue with today's economy, with today's government. We're not far from it. But in any case, the Rebbe says that does not have to mean literally. We can be considered poor in different ways. You can have millions in your bank and still considered poor, and still doing the mitzvahs in a way that triggers the biggest light, the biggest, deepest energy of Hashem, the endless kindness of Hashem. Let's see how the Alter Rebbe says this today's lesson. Says the Alter Rebbe, Vehine, Midas chesed zoi beli gvul midah, nikris al shmoi shel HaKodesh Baruch Hu. And since this is God's manner of practicing benevolence, this mode of unlimited kindness is known by the name of the Holy One, blessed be He, meaning it's called Chasdei Hashem, the kindness of God. And what is the kindness of God? Kedichsi v'chesed Hashem me'olam v'ad olam chulu, as it is written, and God's chesed is everlasting. Unlimited chesed, unlimited kindness. And he goes on to explain, Ki hagam shekol Yisrael heim rachmanim v'gim lechasadim, because although all of Israel are compassionate and practice kindly deeds, that's one of the signs of a Jew, being compassionate. Someone is not compassionate. There's a question on his Judaism, Jewishness. A Jew is compassionate, a Jew is kind. However, regardless, nevertheless, there is a limit and measure to man's compassion. But the Holy One, blessed be He, is called Ein Sof, the Infinite One. And His attributes, like Himself, have no end. As it is written, it is written, for His mercies never cease. The mercies of God never cease. That is why, says the Alter Rebbe, V'zehu she'omar hanavi achar hachurban v'hagalus, chastei Hashem ki lo yisamna. And this is the meaning of the prophet's words after the destruction and the exile, meaning that when we are in exile, the prophet Yirmiyahu says, the kindness of God has surely not ended, ki lo yisamna. And he goes on to explain the other meaning of this verse, pirush lefi shelo yisamnu. That means because we are not perfect, we are not perfect in as much as we are not perfect tmimim and whole. We are not whole without any sin or blemish in our soul, nor in the higher worlds. And that we explained in the past, that when a person commits a sin, it affects the soul and affects the higher worlds also. And again, because every time you do a sin, you're not drawing the godly energy. When a Jew does a mitzvah, when you do a mitzvah, you draw the godly energy, which benefits not only you, all of the higher spiritual worlds as well. So the fact that we're not perfect, and the fact that we do have blemishes, and we cause blemishes, now we need to correct them. We need to fill in those damages. And for that, what is required is a bigger and a deeper energy that we draw through us, ourselves, acting in such a way. That's what Alter Rebbe says. Okay, tzrichim onu leisnaig bechasdei Hashem, shein bli gvul utachlis. We therefore need to conduct ourselves in accordance with God's kindness that are without limit or end. Kedei le'oyer oleinu rachamim v'chesed iloah shu rav chesed v'rachamim bli gvul v'tachlis. And we need to do that in order to call down upon ourselves supreme compassion, which is called the Rav Chesed, and unlimited, infinite compassion. As it is written at the conclusion of this verse, for his mercies never cease. And this is what Alter Rebbe is going to say now, that it seems like this is why now in the time of Golus, before Mashiach, it says people are poor. So it says, "V'zeu she'omrim she'amru rabbeinu zechenam livracha, ein Yisrael negolim ela b'tzedakah." This is what our sages of blessed memory meant by saying that Israel will be redeemed only through charity, through acts of charity. What type of charity? So he says that Rabbi Sheyasu gam in yuptur medina. This refers to the charity that they will perform even if they're legally not obligated. When are you not obligated? So he says, Ki ein ben David bo chulo. From Mashiach, the son of David, will not come, and the Alter Rebbe doesn't conclude, doesn't end that statement. He says chulu, etc. Meaning, what is the end of that verse? It says, the Gemara says, until the pockets will be empty of even the smallest coin. That's what it says in the Gemara. And the Rebbe says, why doesn't the Alter Rebbe finish this verse? Because the Alter Rebbe is very careful. The Alter Rebbe does not want to utter, and certainly not to write down the words that in the time before Mashiach there will be penniless. He doesn't want this to happen. So the question is, do we need to be poor or not? And the answer is what the Rebbe is saying, that to become poor does not necessarily need to be in the sense of not having money. You can have millions in the bank and still be considered poor. Why? Not because you're looking at somebody else that has billions. That is also true. Poverty is all relative. If the people of 100 years ago or 200 years ago would have what the poor people have today, they will be considered rich. But what it means, poor, poverty, can also mean when a person feels poor for lack of having spiritual richness. And when Mashiach comes, we will feel poor, which means that when we will be revealed, we will see the greatness, the depth of the Torah. You will see the greatness of godliness, the spiritual levels, and we feel poor. And again, just like in poverty in the literal sense, you feel poor when you appreciate that you can have more. If you don't appreciate, if you don't know of anything better, then you don't feel poor. You feel content, you feel good. The same thing is in the spiritual sense. You can have people live their lives and never realize that they're missing something, if they're not aware of the wealth that is out there, if they're not aware of the spiritual wealth of the deeper teachings of the Torah. If you're not aware of those things, you can go on and sleepwalk through life without realizing. So this is, says the Rebbe, this is the kind of poverty that we can experience rather than having poverty in the literal sense. To feel poor, to realize that we want more. And that is happening through the teachings that we're learning here with the Tanya. The teachings that you learn, other Hasidus teachings, the depth of the Torah that is revealed. The more you learn, the more you realize how much more that exists and how little you know, how poor you are. So this is the kind of poverty that is a positive poverty, feeling poor. As it says, Tfilah la'ani atov, the prayer of the poor, says King David in the Psalms. The prayer of the poor is a prayer that is accepted. You do it from the depth of the heart. So when we do feel poor in the depth of the heart, that we want to have more, we want to connect to Hashem, we realize how small we are. And in the same time, act yourself, go beyond limitations by giving tzedakah. So you can be wealthy, and you can have much money, and still feel poor, and give beyond limitations, and that ultimately will bring the total revelation of Hashem's light, the Chasdei Hashem, Hashem's kindness, the Rav Chesed, that will bring to the entire world. And this will happen hopefully very soon with the coming of Mashiach. Thank you for joining, and we shall continue tomorrow, a whole new chapter. And